So in academia, we talk about mentors a lot, and it's important to understand that this word is a kind of academic understatement. An academic mentor is more like a godfather. There's a reciprocity of an old-fashioned kind, and what we learned today is how well this has worked for so many people and the transformational impact that has been achieved. And for me as well, Raj has been my academic mentor and godfather for the past 30 years. He helped guide my return back to Carnegie Mellon after my 7 years at DARPA. I'm not a speech researcher, but there are many lessons from Raj that I learned about academic life and life in the world. He emphasized the importance of doing worthy things that will make a difference in the world. There's a Hebrew phrase, tikkun olam, which means repair the world, and that's Raj, repair and enhance. For 12 of those 30 years, I was actually Raj's department head. Think about that idea. It was a department that he founded. It's now 350 people. To use a phrase that was used this afternoon, he gave me lots of things to do. Start a PhD program, things like that. There's someone else I want to mention, which is Anu. She somehow keeps the whole Raj ecosystem together and working. She's super special here, and also I learned in India. So I want to talk briefly about DARPA, about the culture of innovation that was so vividly presented today. But first, what is it about Raj? So he's got this farsightedness and vision, these crazy ideas, but he also has an entrepreneurial spirit in actually making things happen. He was dean of the School of Computer Science. He was on the President's Information Technology Advisory Committee along with Vint. He started the Robotics Institute. He started ISRI. He helped start LTI, Language Technology Institute, the Human Computer Interaction Institute. But there's a kind of relentless pragmatism that is coupled in an interesting way with this farsightedness. How to work the system, how to build things, how to put them to the test, how to actually accomplish real tasks with the technologies that come out. And so there's this symbiosis, and this is the DARPA angle that I want to talk about. Raj's style is a perfect match for DARPA. At DARPA, we talk about grand visions. We talk about how to address challenges of scale and usability from the outset in a project. Not just ride the curves, but deliver the next set of curves. I'm talking about the exponential curves, right? The grand vision. Doing the deep technology, but also with attention to how we build it, how we assess it, how we measure it. What are the use cases? How do we prove the point? What's the task we're going to accomplish? And how do we make a holistic assessment of what's being produced? We heard a lot of stories today that really emphasize this point, how to bring the wild technology ideas into real practice, how to get as close as possible. So, and this is, I have to say it, especially true in the old DARPA. And maybe that's the wrong word I should use because I have two colleagues here, Vint and Steve Crocker, who were at DARPA before I came to DARPA. Vint actually left DARPA about 3 years before I arrived, and he arrived at DARPA about a year or so after Steve left, right? And at that time, there was a mode of operation that was pretty special, and we kept the culture of that alive, even as DARPA itself evolved. And the culture was that CMU, along with Stanford and Berkeley, received these very large umbrella contracts. And the actual management of those contracts was delegated to a small group of very senior PIs, Raj, Alan Newell, Nico Haberman, people of that character. And the result was that they could manifest their own bold vision, their own sense of the horizon, right? Their own choices about how to demonstrate and deliver. And this was really remarkable. But as DARPA evolved, that concept of operations that continued, And so with Raj, we've seen this in the bigger world as well, not just in the DARPA projects. He told me stories about how he was inspired by the extraordinary mathematician Ramanujan. You know the story. He was a village kid. He got lucky. He attracted the attention of the mathematician G.H. Hardy, Cambridge. And we all have become lucky for what Ramanujan was then able to accomplish. So Raj had the idea of scaling up G.H. Hardy. And the way he did it was to create an entirely new university in India, drawing in students from backgrounds that are not in the usual pattern of the IITs. So he actually created an institution, not just within CMU, but this amazing university in India. And I've seen his pragmatic approach to university governance. And I have to say, when I look at all the universities that I've been involved with, the Carnegie Mellon culture is uniquely aligned with the Raj culture and the DARPA culture. That is a special feature of this institution. The people who Raj mentored illustrate this three-way alignment of Raj and DARPA and Carnegie Mellon. And actually there's a fourth dimension as well, which is about computing and software. In our world, the great things happen at the edges of the disciplines. We don't stick to the established problems, not in the middle. We continually make new connections, right? And if I look at Raj's story, connection with physical world, that's robotics. Connection with human interactions, that's the Human-Computer Interaction Institute. The connections with collaborative teams of engineers, that's what ISRI was founded about. The connections with development of underserved populations in the world, because maybe you don't know, but Raj has been extremely active in an area called ICTD, Information and Communications Technology for Development. And so all these areas, and of course the area of human knowledge. Okay, so an example is the Universal Library, the open sourcing of books, especially historical out of copyright books, books that are only seen normally in research libraries. The inspiration here is the Library of Alexandria, the Borges stories. It's more than scanning the texts. It's also about the full engineering ensemble of mass storage, service provisioning, search functionality, UX design, building relationships with the custodians of these books. This happened around the world. And the project anticipated so much of what we take for granted, which now you go to Google, thank you, Vin, and we have it all. But this was much, much earlier. So this is the DARPA way, it's the Raj way, it's the Carnegie Mellon way to put these pieces together, build a prototype that we can test, that we can actually use, bridge the chasm, prove the point. So we're talking today about DARPA and speech, so I just want to mention Charles Wayne. Because Roni actually mentioned Charles earlier today. He was a program manager 35 years ago. He and I overlapped, and I think it's really important to understand a little bit about DARPA, to understand what he did. You know, at DARPA, we cannot proceed with a program unless we know what the exams look like. Not just the final exam, but all the midterm exams. And we talk about this. Heilmeyer questions. What's the midterm exam? What's the final exam? How do we make assessments? And for the wild ideas, this is a really hard problem. And what we heard today in every talk was, here's the challenge that we're taking on. Oh, here's the ATIS challenge. Here's the new challenge that we're taking on. Okay, and all of these provide a way to assess what we're doing. And so for the wild ideas, this is a hard problem to come up with what these exams look like. So Charles had a corpus of speech fragments on a CD. I think it was quite a large corpus, hugely diverse. And he distributed it to all the research teams that were working in the space. And what it showed was the rich dimensionality of the space. It showed distinctions among the many performers. Some were good with like low perplexity and high noise, others the other way around. And the magic of the DARPA approach was, instead of applying our Occam's razor to try to come up with a single one-dimensional scalar figure of merit, instead, they allowed it to settle on this rich dimensionality to understand that different approaches are going to be better at different things, and this space of speech recognition had this dimensionality, and that was essential to success, was to acknowledge that. And this is part of the DARPA awesomeness, is accepting this nuance, really thinking it through, not oversimplifying. So my final point is that at DARPA we also make distinctions between research programs, which have beginnings, middles, and ends, typically 4 years, and areas of focus with a long trajectory. So AI is a long trajectory. So is natural language processing, including speech. Now we're doing, for example, cultural signals, emotional content, affinity signaling. We're getting way beyond entity extraction. It's going to keep going because it encompasses so much. So as a final point, I want to reiterate something that I've had to say a lot while I was at DARPA, which is we're just at the beginning with AI. We have a long way to go. It's not just machine learning, big data, and the cloud. There's a whole lot more to do. With machine learning, pure machine learning, we know we have exponential costs, we have linear quality improvement, and we have really bad asymptotes on robustness. We're not going to get there with pure machine learning. So we need to think about hybrids. And speech people know this already, hybrids of statistical and symbolic. On how to learn on the symbolic side, how to break through the barriers of scale and brittleness for symbolic AI, which we have kind of taken for granted, but maybe not so much. Maybe curriculum learning, maybe some other approaches can help us break through those barriers. We can learn without labels, the way infants learn, right? And with domain concepts in place. In our world, in the world of DARPA, labels can be very expensive and sparse. So also how to work with humans. This is a problem that Licklider identified. He called it symbiosis, human-system interaction. And we think, okay, we have the HCI Institute, we're getting really better at figuring out what color the pixels should be. This is a problem that's actually gotten much harder over the years. We're getting better at it, but it's getting harder quicker than we're getting better at it. And that's because the systems are getting smarter, the tasks are getting more complicated. The systems to interact with humans, they need epistemic models, they need task and role models, they need attentional models, even emotional models. And then how can we engineer systems with AI that can continue to get smarter and also become more trustworthy? Because the military planners are thinking about operations that execute faster than thought. That's a scary thing to think about if you're going to just use machine learning to manifest autonomy. That won't work, and they know that. So, and as Raj often reminds me, how can we use AI to help engineer those systems? So, it's now my great pleasure to introduce Vint Cerf. I have an advantage in this introduction. We all know Vint. We know a lot about what he's accomplished. But I want to mention a few salient points. I mentioned earlier that he was at DARPA. You know, he left in 1982. I arrived actually pretty clueless. I was a young faculty member. I'd been here barely 5-6 years. A few years later, but I also know that the amount of time that he spent at DARPA and even Steve Crocker and I spent at DARPA, it rewires the brain. You just think about how to make things happen in a very different way. I saw the packet radios that Vint helped make. Now we all have packet radios in our pocket, right? But back then the packet radio was this big luggable. It was a really crazy idea. People thought, packet radio, my goodness. You know, at DARPA, this is, in my view, unbiased, I guess, view, is it's the best training for technology leaders. He came in, of course, after having designed the TCP and IP protocols with Bob Kahn, who was also at DARPA. He overlapped with Steve, right? Bob Kahn. So at DARPA, we always talk about scaling up. What are the limits? And the interesting thing with these protocols is we're coming up somewhere near 10 to the 10th. Find anything else that's scaled up that much. So, and he's also a big player in internet governance. We were just talking about this, but also in the world of public science and technology. He and Raj were both involved with the PTAC, the President's Advisory Committee on IT. They have a common interest in digital libraries. Vint has been a great communicator on the subject of accessibility, and he thinks big thoughts, internet in space. You know, TCP is not your friend when you have latencies, as astronomical latencies. I've always learned a lot from Vint. His leadership, his thought leadership has been really important in the community, but on the subject of latencies, let's diminish the latency and